All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. Lots of news to get to. Don't miss any part of the show. tyt.com/join to become a member. Don't miss a minute of it or our dozens of shows. Go. What do you got, Anna?
All right. Representative Steve King from Iowa has a long history of saying things that most people who can think for themselves would deem racist. And we're gonna show you examples of that in just a minute, but during a recent interview with the New York Times, King couldn't understand why white nationalist was something offensive. In fact, he was quoted as saying in this Times piece, white nationalist, white supremacist, Western civilization, how did that language become offensive? And then he said, why did I sit in classes teaching me about the merits of our history and our civilization? Now, following that statement, a number of Republican lawmakers have been calling on Representative King to resign. And it appears that they have now decided to strip him of any committee power within the House of Representatives. So all the committees that he was on, he will no longer serve on. King had been a member of the House Judiciary, Agriculture, and Small Business Committees. He had also served as chairman of the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Justice in the last Congress.
So I want to focus on that for a second. The Republicans had seen all of the other racist things that Steve King had said in the past. And they still had him, not just on the Judiciary Committee, but as the chairman of the subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Justice. They put this guy as the chairman of the subcommittee on Civil Justice. I mean, that is basically spitting in minorities' faces. They already know all the other things that he said. Look, Steve King actually made an interesting defense of this last outrageous comment by saying, hey, look, the New York Times got me out of context in that I was saying, hey, white nationalism and white supremacy is one thing. Well, that's not what he said, but I was referring to Western civilization and how did that become a bad word? Because we're taught in classes about how great our civilization is. And that's an interesting point, and that's why sometimes progressives say, no, we should teach more accurate history. It doesn't mean that America is bad and the West is bad. It means sometimes we've done great things, sometimes we've done terrible things. And so, but Steve King doesn't want you to know that. So he's saying, look, I was just referring to Western civilization because we don't teach that white nationalism and white supremacy is good in classes. Okay, that'd be an interesting defense if it was not for the rest of the context that we're about to show you. Steve King has made one racist comment after another, and this time he got his hand caught in the cookie jar. So I think what the Republicans get upset at people like Steve King for is not for being racist, but for exposing the rest of them for agreeing to all those policies anyway, but just not saying the racist words. That's why they're so annoyed with Steve King.
Yes.
We were doing all these wonderfully discriminatory policies in the first place, and now Steve, you're gonna go expose it by actually naming it.
And he can't help himself. I think that following Trump's election, he has felt emboldened to be a lot more open about his white supremacy. And so we're gonna give you all the examples that we've seen throughout the years that prove who Representative King really is. And let's start off with this infamous video of King talking about the Dreamers and what their calves are like. Take a look.
Parents brought them in, it wasn't their fault. It's true in some cases, but they aren't all valedictorians. They weren't all brought in by their parents. For everyone who's a valedictorian, there's another 100 out there that they weigh 130 pounds and they've got calves the size of cantaloupes because they're hauling 75 pounds of marijuana across the desert.
So he characterizes most of the Dreamers as individuals who are trying to smuggle drugs across the border in their calves because they have calves the size of cantaloupes.
I mean, look, do I have to bother telling you guys that there's no factual basis for immigrants having cantaloupe calves? And that the only person who would make that up, remember the Dreamers are kids who are brought in by their parents. There's no evidence that any Dreamer was brought in by their parents dragging 75 pounds of marijuana in. He made that up, why? Because it's demagoguery. So you should hate the immigrants, even their little kids. You should hate them too because they have cantaloupe calves.
We're just getting started.
This is not subtle.
Yeah, we're just getting warmed up, as Cenk would say. So the next video is from 2016 during the elections, and here's what he has to say about whites versus everyone else.
I'd ask you to go back through history and figure out where are these contributions that have been made by these other categories of people that you're talking about. Where did any other
than white people?
Then Western civilization itself, that's rooted in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America.
Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America, Western civilization. I mean, that's the thing that he does often. He will replace the word race with culture. So when he gets accused of racism, there will be, in his mind, plausible deniability.
Yeah, so let me just, because unfortunately there's a lot of young people on the internet who get influenced by this garbage, and some really juvenile thinkers that influence them in that direction, including Steve King. And they go, well, yeah, right, Western civilization. Now I made all of them Trump. Western civilization, it's great, right? And all the other civilizations suck. That's not remotely true. The Chinese civilization was amazing. So if you're talking about culture, there are, and I've said this 1,000 times, I'm not your everyday liberal. I believe that there are differences in culture, and I believe that a lot of the cultures have wonderful parts and not so great parts, and we should actually figure out what the good parts are and take that. But that doesn't mean, if you then say, well, Western civilization is all great and the rest of the cultures suck, you're an idiot, because that's not remotely true. It's not about being, oh, I need a safe space because you said the Chinese are bad. No, it's not about being politically correct. It's about being factually and historically correct. So for example, if you were to say, hey, Western civilization focuses on education. Well, there's a lot of that is correct. Public education started in Scotland, and it was a wonderful, basically not an invention, but a new way of doing things that greatly enhanced our society, culture, etc. That is why you had all those geniuses come out of Scotland, not because all of a sudden there were more smart people in Scotland like Adam Smith and Hume, etc., but because more people had opportunity because of public education. But you know who else emphasized education? And way long before Scotland did? China. Chinese culture is all built around education. And then you go to Egypt. In Egypt, like they conveniently forget every other civilization that has done miraculous things. Europe was a bunch of peasants groveling in mud at the time that Egypt had conquered the world. Now, does that make, if at that point you had a Steve King in Egypt, they'd be like, he's like, look, obviously these Western and Eastern Europeans are the worst of the worst. They've accomplished nothing. Egypt has built pyramids and the most amazing things that humanity has ever seen. And these white people are so stupid, they'll never amount to anything. And that would have been wrong, because different advancements in cultures are based on a lot of different things: politics, economics, geography, and the course of history. So at different times, Egypt, Rome, China, the Arabs, the Ottomans have all been, the Incas, the Mayas have all been dominant for different reasons. And they had great parts of their culture and they had terrible parts of their culture, all of them. But if you boil it down to race and me good Western civilization, all other ones bad, you're really incredibly unsophisticated. Plus, in the case of Steve King, racist, because he keeps saying, you see it in the clips, cantaloupe calves over here, white Western civilization, awesome.
One other thing that I wanted to quickly point out is that he is very supportive of the Confederate flag. In fact, he would display the Confederate flag in his office on his desk. He is a lawmaker from the state of Iowa. Okay, Iowa was part of the Union.
So it has nothing to do with the Civil War. So why is a guy from Iowa all of a sudden supporting the South in the Civil War? There's only one reason. Why? Because he thought, oh, the cotton gin. God, I love the culture in the South because the cotton gin was so efficient. No, when you hang a Confederate flag and you're not from the South, you are saying, I like racism. I like the treasonous guys in the South historically that betrayed the United States of America and murdered American soldiers at a greater rate than any other war that we have ever had, any other opponent or enemy we have ever had. Why? To protect slavery. That is a declaration of your racism. I mean, and if you didn't know all that history and you thought, hey man, I watched Dukes of Hazzard and I thought General Lee, the car looked cool and I like the Confederate flag, and I'm a regular dude, I'm an accountant and I just didn't know, okay, that's one thing. If you're a politician whose job is to know and you rub it in people's face and you have all these other videos out there, I mean, really, we're having this conversation about whether Steve King's racist?
We just gave you the tip of the iceberg when it comes to video evidence of his statements in regard to race and in regard to religion. So here is a video of Steve King. He was defending the use of the Confederate flag, and then he decided to defend the use of something else.
When I go to Germany and they've outlawed the swastika, I look at them and I think, we have a First Amendment. That can't happen here in the United States because we're open enough.
Wow. Okay, so look, guys, I believe in the First Amendment, and we defend it to the hilt in every case, including when the right wing say terrible things. So I believe it in principle, and so I would not ban the swastika here, okay? But it is one thing to say, even though the swastika is as abhorrent a flag as you could possibly find, we still should not ban it. It's another thing to say, as Steve King just said, as you saw, I mean, I go to Germany, I don't know why they got the swastika banned. I don't know, maybe, we don't have it banned here because we're open-minded. Wait, open-minded to what? Open-minded to what? Murder of 13 million people under that flag and under that banner? Look, it's one thing to say, I protect offensive speech. It's easy to protect non-offensive speech. Even those scumbag Nazis that killed all those people, I will defend their rights. It's another thing to say, hey, I'm open-minded, why don't we have swastikas here?
So he has this long record. I mean, we just gave you some of the examples. There's more out there, but if we were to do that, we would dedicate an entire show to it. So we're gonna move on to what the Republican said in regard to his New York Times interview. Now again, nothing else set Republicans off. They didn't speak out against Representative King. In fact, most Republicans would make excuses for him, defend him. And then now all of a sudden you have people like Mitt Romney, for instance, coming out aggressively against Representative King. Here's what he has to say.
What was that conversation? It was about how those words got plugged into our dialogue, not when the words became offensive, which is what the technical interpretation of this is. How did that language become offensive? It's how did that offensive language get injected into our political dialogue? Who does that? How does it get done? How do they get by?
I don't think there's a room for Steve King's comments in polite company or in the Republican Party or for that matter in Congress. I think you ought to step aside and I think Congress ought to make it very clear he has no place there.
So essentially calling him to step down as a representative.
So I'll say this, look, even though I think that the Republican Party has been doing this for decades, it's called the Southern strategy. It was meant to appeal to racists in the South and to get them to switch from the Democratic Party, which they used to support, to the Republican Party, and it was stunningly successful. They did switch over. That is why the Republicans now control all the red states in the South. And it was based, and by the way, to give credit to the RNC, two different heads of the RNC, Republican National Committee, have apologized for the Southern strategy because it was racist. And to this day, they still use code words, etc. The reason the Romneys and the Kings of the Romneys of the world get upset at Steve King and Donald Trump is they're like, you are revealing our ugly face. We are supposed to protect and hide that while we do the same exact things. Now, but to give them credit, it still matters to call out Steve King. It still matters to say, no, that's beyond the pale. Because that is also about our culture. You want to talk about real culture? Do we accept bald-faced racism, open racism, out of the closet racism, or don't we? So for Romney and Joni Ernst and so many others to come out and say, no, not acceptable, that's still a positive step.
Yeah, so Representative McCarthy and Representative Steve Stewart also came out against King, denounced his statements, called for him to step down in some cases. And so you're right, I'm glad that they're finally realizing what's going on. But on a recent episode of No Filter, one I had yesterday, for a very long time, people like Ben Shapiro, even after watching and responding directly to some of the videos that I showed you today, he would make excuses for King. I don't know what it is about this recent New York Times interview that changed their mind, but I guess all it took was this particular quote to make them realize, yeah, let's believe who Steve King is when he tells us who he is.
And the reason is because Ben Shapiro, Mitt Romney, etc., they don't mind the underlying racism, and bigotry. They don't mind it. They mind the fact that it was revealed. My God, Steve King, you're so unsophisticated, you're Trump level unsophisticated that you say, what's wrong with white supremacy? Well, then I gotta banish you, you idiot. Now, to give you, look, one last quote, because this is what Ben Shapiro, Mitt Romney, and all the rest thought was good enough. Steve King has said, we can't restore our civilization with somebody else's babies. Now, if it isn't about race, what do you mean somebody else's babies? If it's about culture, why couldn't Latinos love Western civilization? My dad was born a Turkish Muslim in southeastern Turkey. He's atheist now, but he came in, he loves American culture, and that's part of why we moved here. Loves it, right? So, but what do you mean somebody else's babies? Well, I would be, I guess, somebody else's baby, right? And to Steve King, it doesn't matter how much I love American culture. It doesn't matter how much my dad believed in the American dream and moved his whole family here, because that's somebody else's babies. So obviously, he's talking about race. But that line was not enough.
It was not enough, no. In fact, Shapiro defended him when it came to that specific tweet. He put that out there as a tweet when he was defending a right-wing politician in a different country. But look, again, finally, I'm glad that people came to their senses and they're denouncing this, and it does hold weight to denounce it. It does hold weight to come out against someone who openly, on a regular basis, makes statements that are prideful of his white supremacy and prideful of his ideology that other races are beneath the white race. Now, with that said, there's another element to the story that I want to touch on. Working in the news business, you come across various videos or tweets coming from representatives like Representative Steve King that make it abundantly clear what his ideology is on race. He has been making statements about race for years now, and he puts down Mexicans, blacks, Jewish people. He once defended the use of swastikas. And so it's curious that NBC did not want to refer to Steve King as a racist. In fact, their standards department put out a letter or a memo to the employees at NBC encouraging them to, quote, be careful to avoid characterizing King's remarks as racist. It is okay to attribute to others as in what many are calling racist or something like that. That was from Susan Sullivan, NBC's standards division department is where she works in. And Huffington Post reported on this because one of their staffers reached out to Huffington Post with this memo. And then after the Huffington Post wrote about it, they changed course, writing, quote, we revised our guidelines on Representative Steve King's comments. It is fair to characterize King's comments as racist and to point out that he has a history of racist comments, and the context can be shared that others hold that view as well.
Yeah, so this is the most extreme case of whataboutism, and both sides do it. You know, some people say supporting white supremacy is racism, and others say it isn't. But white supremacy is by definition racist. It says that whites are superior to other races. Now, before, Steve King had already made it abundantly clear when he was on MSNBC, he talked about how, well, what other culture has ever done anything good in the world? It's only Western civilization, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and America that has ever done anything positive. And so that was clear. He said we can't restore our civilization with someone else's babies. That was clear. But for NBC and New York Times and all other media organizations, no, not clear enough. But in this case, he said, what's wrong with white supremacy? And NBC's still like, yeah, but is he saying white people are superior to other races? Yeah, that's the definition. And so, but even then, no, some other people are calling it racist.
So I think that there are two possibilities here as to why the standards division put out this memo. One possibility is that we all know that journalists and the mainstream media have this obsession with appearing objective, and oftentimes they mistake objectivity with neutrality. And so they might fear that calling it what it is and referring to Steve King's statements as racist might appear to be taking a position or having a bias. When, I mean, the facts are on the table. You see the same videos, you see the same content that we see on a regular basis. I think that when you have that much evidence, it's okay to tell your audience the truth about who this politician really is. The other concern might be, I don't know, a possible defamation lawsuit. I don't.
No way, no. But your second point is merited. It is general caution. So whether it's because of their concern about lawsuits or anything else, but mainly political pressure, that they are like, hey, don't ever call anything what it actually is. Make sure that you are politically correct rather than factually correct. So you want to talk about political correctness, this is it. And so I want to expand on what Anna was saying about neutrality and objectivity. It's not just that neutrality is the wrong standard. It is actually the opposite of objectivity. So when someone says, I'm in favor of white supremacy, where that whites are superior to other races, and you say, well, I can't tell if he's in favor of white supremacy. Some people say he is and some people say he isn't. That is a neutral position. But that is the opposite of the objective position. He just told you he's in favor of white supremacy. So you then change the truth, change the objective truth to make it neutral, which is a lie. And so that's a great, great trick that I don't know if it was the Republicans, the establishment, whoever, maybe it was an honest error, I doubt it, but that's okay, that unfortunately has been pounded in the heads of all of these journalists. Do not worry about the truth, be neutral to the truth. And that doesn't do your job, that's the opposite of being a journalist.
I completely agree with you. And NBC News was the outlet that refused to do anything with Ronan Farrow's reporting on Harvey Weinstein. And I only bring that up because that was a giant mistake on the part of NBC. That was a huge story that they should have aired, especially with the overwhelming details and evidence that he had in that piece, but they avoided publishing it. I don't know what their reasoning was behind it, but there's this pattern emerging where it appears that NBC wants to protect people that they shouldn't be protecting. It's your job, I'm talking about the news division specifically, to do your jobs and share the news with the American people, not try to protect your own brand by pretending like you're neutral or avoiding offending anyone in a position of power. And
so, look, this one got to be easy because he couldn't have made it any easier unless he openly, saying out you're in favor, you don't see what's wrong with white supremacy is about 1% different than saying, yeah, I'm a proud racist, right? So, NBC, until they got pressure, didn't even want to go that extra percentage, and they were skittish about it, but they got so much pushback that they're like, oh, wait a minute, the people at the country club that we all have drinks with now are saying we're doing the wrong thing. Okay, then we change. Even the New York Times changed, oh my God, even if they changed, then okay, fine. And by the way, great credit to Yashar Ali who broke the story for Huffington Post. But on more important issues, now I'm not saying that the issue of racism isn't important, it's massively important, only because Steve King's on his own here. But when it came to the Republican Party versus Democratic Party versus the truth on the issue, for example, torture during the Bush years, what they would the standards for almost all the media companies was that they said what human rights groups and critics say is torture, and oftentimes they didn't even say that, they called it enhanced interrogation. But wait a minute, you don't have to do that caveat. It was torture according to United States law, not just international law that we were supposed to abide by and we had signed on to, but US law, waterboarding, let alone the physical assaults that we did, let alone the sleep deprivation, which is also torture, let alone burying people alive or threatening to bury people alive, I should say, which we did on occasions and all those things. Those are the definition, according to the law, of torture. But since Dick Cheney and the Republicans said, do not call it torture, otherwise we'll say you're biased, all those media organizations chose to be politically correct and not factually correct. So they would say things like what human rights groups and critics say is torture, but what Dick Cheney says is enhanced interrogation. Well, you were neutral, but you were not objective and you did not do your job. So I think that a progressive critique of the media bothers them more than a right-wing critique. Because the right wings are a bunch of knuckleheads. Why don't you do propaganda for us? Right? That's not an interesting critique. But when we challenge them on what is objective standards, then they get really uncomfortable and they don't want to have that conversation because they know they're wrong. And so I want to leave you though on a fun note and give credit to Meredith Blake with a great tweet here. When Yashar Ali broke the story and he tweeted out that NBC is saying don't call it racist, but say that many people are calling it racist. Meredith tweeted, many are calling this pathetic.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
We got to take a break. Let's do that. And when we come back, we have more stories for you, including William Barr's testimony during the hearing to confirm him as Trump's next attorney general.
In one of the points, they seem to admit that Trump's an idiot. It's fascinating. They just do it right in front of us and we all move on. I'm gonna keep pounding this home now, 25th Amendment. Anyway, we'll explain when we come back. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you wanna get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks, just a couple of comments here. Eclectic Miscellaneous says the irony is that Steve King doesn't realize that he's what's wrong with Western civilization. His backwards racist views are on the way out and human civilization will all be better for it. So I wanna just elaborate on that for a second. Yeah, I said I love American culture in the last segment. So what do I love about American culture? That it is open to other races, other ethnicities, other cultures, and it gets better and better as we add those races and cultures and the positive parts of those cultures. Now, what don't I love about American culture in the past? Well, and unfortunately today, well, the racism, slavery in the past. I mean, is anybody proud of that? Or at least openly proud of that? I guess Steve King comes as close as you can get. So that's the part of our culture we want to lose. So if American and Western culture has a problem, it is the racism that Steve King exhibits, which he then ironically says is the best part of the culture. He misunderstands it 100%. So thank you for sending in that comment. And that's from the members section, and our members are great about all these comments. I'm gonna read one last one here. Progressive Engineer writes in, why turn on Steve King now? Because he scraped out a win and kept a seat in Republican hands. Now he can resign, the governor appoints a replacement and the replacement runs as an incumbent without racist baggage in 2 years. Bingo, exactly. Our members are incredibly smart. Now they could have called out Steve King before the election, but then that might have cost the Republicans a seat. And they don't mind his racism as long as they keep the seat. And look, others wrote in about the voters of Iowa, one of 19, I believe, wrote in about that. And that's a mixed bag. So you'd be shocked at what a lot of voters don't know. Do they know every single clip we showed you? Of course not. Do they know some of that? Do some of them know some of it? Yes. So should you blame them for the people who do know about it? Yes. But a lot of them don't. So it's a mixed bag. But I think they're all on borrowed time there. J.D. Schulten had a great run there. I don't know if he's gonna run again. If he does, I think next time he'll probably win. And King barely beat him with this terrible track record. But now, these comments have gotten so much more publicity. So if he does stay and runs in the next election, well then a lot higher percentage of his voters will know how racist he is. And then if after this they still put him in office, then okay, then it's 100% on them. All right, Anna, what's next?
All right. Today, William Barr, Trump's pick for his next attorney general, had his hearing in the Senate. And the line of questioning was important, especially when you consider the fact that Barr had put out a memo criticizing the Muller investigation into Russian collusion and Trump's possible obstruction of justice. Now, the memo raised a lot of concerns, and also through this hearing, we found that Barr explained that he had met with Trump in 2017 about potentially joining Trump's legal team, and that Trump had pressed him about what he thought about the Mueller investigation. So look, Trump doesn't like the Mueller investigation, we all know that. And the fact that he chose someone who had put out a memo that was very critical of the investigation raised a lot of red flags. But he did answer very specific questions about the investigation and what he would do in different scenarios if he were the Attorney General. And his answers were fascinating. We're gonna let you take a look for yourselves and then we'll analyze them for you.
What would be your breaking point? When would you pick up and leave? When is your Jim Mattis moment? When the president has asked you to do something which you think is inconsistent with your oath. Doesn't that give you some pause as you embark on this journey?
It might give me pause if I was 45 or 50 years old, but it doesn't give me pause right now. I am not going to do anything that I think is wrong, and I will not be bullied into doing anything I think is wrong by anybody, whether it be editorial boards or Congress or the president.
So with the exception of that memo that was critical of Mueller's investigation, Barr seemed to be a pretty safe pick for Trump because Barr had worked for the George H.W. Bush administration. Everyone seems to believe in his extensive experience, that he's one of the best lawyers in the country. And so, again, I don't know how this is all gonna come out. The Senate is controlled by Republicans. He's gonna get confirmed, we all know that. But I don't know if he's telling the truth when it comes to the Mueller investigation.
So he was George H.W. Bush's Attorney General. So since he was confirmed for that, this seems like a layup. And we talked about when he was picked, well, he's nearly a perfect guy for Donald Trump because he is already part of the establishment, but he put out this memo saying, yeah, I think Mueller investigation's, not right, and I support Donald Trump. By the way, if you're a random lawyer, and a lot of people have made this point all the way up to Dianne Feinstein, that's my second day in a row giving her credit, saying you're in a normal law firm. It's a good law firm. I don't know that he's one of the best attorneys in the country, but it is a very solid law firm that he's in. Why are you all of a sudden writing a memo about Mueller? Why is a random lawyer writing a memo about, he's not working on any political case at the time. He's just like, that's him raising his hand and saying, Trump, you can pick me because I'm gonna defend you. So now the question that the senators have to decide is, when he raised his hand and said, don't worry, Donald, I got your back, you should pick me, was that the real Barr? Or when today he comes in front of the Senate and says, oh, no. Mueller investigation, I'm gonna allow that to continue. Of course I believe in the process and I've got principles and I would resign right away, as you just saw there. Is that the real Barr? Look, my experience of having covered politics for over 2 decades is that when they're in front of the Senate, that is not the real person.
Of course.
9 out of 10 times they are lying. Now you're not supposed to say that in polite company. You're only supposed to say about Donald Trump because he's so obvious, right? But a lot of these establishment figures lie through their teeth, and they go, especially the justices. They go up and they go, oh my God, I'm just gonna call balls and strikes. Politics, I never heard of politics. What's politics? And then they go in, and whether they're conservative or liberal, they vote with conservatives or liberals almost every time, except the liberals will then vote with corporate interests as well. So, and they'll proudly declare that as well. So basically, it's very impolite for us to point out that the track record of people in front of the Senate, when they say that they will not be influenced by political factors, as he's saying now, their track record is terrible overall, terrible. They're almost always lying. So this guy who got picked because of the memo, now of course says, oh, I'd like to be confirmed. Earlier my audience was Trump. Now my audience is these senators who'd like me to pretend that I'm unbiased. Well, okay, so he's gonna pretend. So what's he gonna do at the end? And I'll tell you this. So again, I'll tell you things that you won't hear in the rest of the media. He will do whatever is good for himself. So if he feels like, hey, Trump's gonna make it and he's gonna survive, and then I'll be his attorney general for a long time and I'll be great for my career, then he'll back Trump. If he thinks, oh wow, this is really bad, Trump's gonna go under, I will be a man of principle and people will applaud the principles that I have. I will stand up to Donald Trump. That's how he'll make the decision.
Well, let's take a listen to more of his testimony in regard to the Mueller investigation. He was asked about it throughout this hearing, and I wanted to share this one final video about it with you.
You say you've known Mueller a long time. Would you say you have a close relationship with Mr. Mueller?
I would say we were good friends.
Would you say that you understand him to be a fair-minded person?
Absolutely.
Do you trust him to be fair to the president and the country as a whole?
Yes. I believe it is in the best interest of everyone, the president, Congress, and the American people, that this matter be resolved by allowing the special counsel to complete his work. I will not permit partisan politics, personal interests, or any other improper consideration to interfere with this or any other investigation. I will follow the special counsel regulations scrupulously and in good faith, and on my watch, Bob will be allowed to finish his work.
Do you believe Mr. Mueller would be involved in a witch hunt against anybody?
I don't believe Mr. Mueller would be involved in a witch hunt.
Do you believe that Attorney General Sessions had a conflict because he worked on the Trump campaign?
I'm not sure of all the facts, but I think he probably did the right thing recusing himself.
So, God, these guys are so political.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
The last statement in regard to recusing himself. So he was asked about whether he would recuse himself if ethics officials had recommended that he do so. And he made it clear that he would listen to their recommendation, but that he would ultimately make the final decision as to whether or not he recuses himself. I think that wording is telling. Even in this context where it's clear that people who are being asked these questions in these hearings usually tell them what the senators want to hear, he still wasn't willing to say, yes, I would listen to the ethics officials and I would recuse myself upon their recommendation. Just want to put that out there.
Yeah. Look, give him credit for being savvy. Why did you write the memo saying the Mueller investigation is wrong, unless you were planning to, be considered for this position? There's no other reason, okay? So, and now why are you saying the opposite during your testimony? You're saying the opposite because you want to be confirmed, and you think the senators won't confirm you if you say the same thing that you said in the memo, which is the Mueller investigation is unacceptable, et cetera, right? So now all of a sudden he seems like he literally said, Bob Mueller, we're great friends, we're good friends. Oh, Bob Mueller would never do anything wrong. Then why'd you write the goddamn memo, right? So you'll excuse me if I don't believe him. But I'm telling you, right, I'm not making a prediction that he's gonna back Trump. He's gonna do it based on what is good for his career. That's who William Barr is.
Now, there was one other part of these hearings that I was amused by. It's maybe not the most important part of the meeting or the hearing, but I want to share it with you guys. During William Barr's Senate hearing and confirmation process for Attorney General, he had this interaction with Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican, about Donald Trump's attention span. Here's how it went.
I talked to his staff and I said, I want to follow up and send something to Rod in writing, but is he a one-pager kind of guy, or how much will he read? And the guy said he's like you. He doesn't mind wading into a dense.
Don't you think
memo.
President Trump is a one-pager kind of guy?
Excuse me?
President Trump is a one-pager kind of guy.
I suspect he is.
Okay, just remember that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
That was such a weird admission. Like, why did Lindsey Graham even bring that up? Trump's not going to be happy about any of these questions from Graham in that sense.
That was amazing. They were just making fun of how dumb Trump is.
Yeah.
They just did it out in the open during this hearing that everyone's watching.
Let's talk about it in the context of other professions. So by one pager, in case you're unclear about it, and because we've done a lot of reporting on it, Trump won't read anything past one page. And a lot of times his staffers have said, even on the one page, you got to put pictures or put his name in there a lot so it'll draw his attention. I mean, I don't have to continue, that's so pathetic, but I will, just in case. Imagine if there was an engineer who was a one pager. Oh, no, Bob will only read one page of how you build that bridge. But there's a lot of pages to how we build that bridge or that building. No, Bob's a one pager. Imagine if he was a doctor. Well, Bob will only read that one page about how to do brain surgery. No, but wait a minute, there's a lot of pages in how you do brain surgery.
Yeah.
No, he's a one-pager.
But it applies to everything, even jobs that aren't, life and death professions, like what we do. So would you trust anyone who delivers the news based on what they read on one page?
Well, then you shouldn't watch TV because all they do is read the prompter, and they didn't write there. Almost no anchor on television writes what they read. Rachel Maddow's an exception. There's a couple of other exceptions, but outside of that, their producers write it and they come on air and go, "Okay, the prompter says," right? But no, but back to Trump. Being a one-pager means you're not very bright. You're juvenile, and look, don't get me wrong. If you're annoyed by a 28, 38-page document on policy, I hear you. But then you probably shouldn't. Yeah. Then you shouldn't be president. So if it turns out that the North Korea conflict is more complicated than one page, we need the president to read past one page. But he won't do it. And look here, this is not Democrats. These are not liberals. Lindsey Graham is one of his top allies. And that's why I was amused that he gratuitously brought it up. Lindsey Graham's like, he's a one-pager, right? And the guy who's gonna be his attorney general, I was like, yeah, I suspect so. Okay, 25th Amendment. If the president cannot read past one page, 25th Amendment, you gotta get him out of office. He's not qualified to be president. I mean, what if we're talking about a nuclear situation where you gotta read into page 2? And he's like, nope. You gotta make that one page really strong because I only read the one page. If in page 2 the whole world blows up, sorry, I'm a one-pager.
Okay, I'm gonna ask our director to cue up that video again. Don't go to it yet, I will toss to it. Because they're talking about how dumb Trump is, like out in the open, right? And it's incredible because I don't think William Barr expected it. And what I love about this video, look, you guys gotta understand, like there's very little joy in the job I do right now, right? So when I come across these amusing interactions, I'll watch them over again just to give me some hope, just to keep me going. And so I just couldn't help but notice William Barr's face as Lindsey Graham was asking the question. And I just want you guys to pay attention to how caught off guard he was. Let's watch it again.
I talked to his staff and I said, I want to follow up and send something to Rod in writing, but is he a one-pager kind of guy or how much will he read? And the guy said he's like you. He doesn't mind wading into a dense
Don't you think
memo.
President Trump is a one-pager kind of guy?
Excuse me?
President Trump is a one-pager kind of guy.
I suspect he is.
Okay, just remember that. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm glad we play that video again because I'm also amused by the smiles on everyone else's face.
Yeah, the lady behind Barr.
Yeah, the lady behind Barr is like, yeah, one-pager, idiot, right? And I don't know if she's a Republican or a Democrat. And then Feinstein's next to Lindsey Graham. She woke up out of her nap to be like, yeah, one-pager, right? Okay. Now, not yet, because Graham has, and by the way, if you misunderstood what he's saying because you didn't have enough context there, he was asking if Rod Rosenstein's a one-pager kind of guy. And they're like, no, like you, he wades into the policy because he's actually a smart person and cares, right? So Feinstein, now she starts smiling. The lady in the background smiling. They're all smiling like, yeah, that's right. We have an idiot for a president. That's so funny. He's totally incapable of doing the job, but we're all pretending that he is. No. We probably shouldn't do the 25th Amendment. That's so funny.
Oh, come on, you made it all serious.
No, get him out of office.
You're right,
25th Amendment right now. Do it right now, man. The guy is incapable of leading anything. He can't lead it out of a wet paper bag. He led his own business into 6 different bankruptcies, okay? And I wonder why he was bankrupt 6 times. If you can't read past page 1, and you got a loan like you did with the Taj Mahal at 14%, you might find out on page 2 that you can't afford that loan. Oops, he's a one-pager. Moron. And I gotta say this, sorry Anna, last thing out from me. I am the bad guy for calling Trump stupid. The rest of the media says, oh, that's unacceptable. No, you guys are being politically correct. You're saying, well, some people say he's like a smart person. Trump says that. Okay, and some people say otherwise. Actually, almost no one in the media says what is plainly obvious. The president is a moron. and everyone knows it, but in order to be polite and politically correct, they won't say it. And that's the difference between us and them. You all know it. Even if you're a conservative, you know it.
I desperately want a TYT, Shop TYT t-shirt that has Trump's face on it with the quote, one pager kind of guy.
just one pager.
I will wear that shirt on this show with a blazer. Okay, that's how much I would love that shirt. Anyway, all right.
ShopTYT.com.
We got to take a break. When we come back, there's some breaking news, but let's gather our deets and then we'll come back with that and more.
Go.